Ladies and gentlemen, we are indeed moving ahead with reconciliation. Um, Democrats, they have decided to move forward with the vote to provide more economic assistance, whether or not Republicans get their stuff together and decide to actually come to the negotiating table willing and ready to help the American people. And the way by which Democrats are going to essentially move ahead with or without Republicans is through this process called reconciliation. If you don't know, it allows legislation to pass with a simple majority of 51 votes in the Senate, as opposed to the typically required 60 votes. And we talked about this last week. Remember, in the last episode, I mentioned that if we were going to see stimulus passed, we essentially had two options, and reconciliation was one of those options that I discussed. I want to read you a quote from Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on this matter. And it says, and I'm quoting here, "We cannot afford to dither, delay, or dilute. We need a big, bold package along the lines of what President Biden has proposed, the American Relief Plan. We hope that our Republican colleagues will join us in offering amendments." End quote. He did kind of continue, but I wanted to share that quote because it's a lot of people over the last few weeks, right? Well, not even few weeks. The president has only been in office since the 20th, and I find it actually pretty astounding. The people who, well, I think in all fairness, you can critique the president. You can critique any president. I do think that the people who are saying that President Biden is not doing enough, or that he's not really doing anything, or they're critiquing him along those lines, I think they're being really unfair because, quite frankly, when you compare everything that we are seeing out of the Biden-Harris administration to this point, we are actually moving at breakneck speeds in a lot of regards, right? Um, and kind of in opposition to that, you also have some people on the other side saying that he's doing too much in too short of a period of time. And it just goes to show you that you're never going to be able to completely please everybody. And this is just kind of like even beyond politics in your own personal life. Just let me give you kind of a life pro tip here. Quit trying to please everybody. You are not going to please everybody. We're seeing that right here in politics. Again, looking at what's going on with President Biden. But anywho, getting back to what I was saying, it's pretty relieving to hear this come from Chuck Schumer, because people have been worried about uh, potential capitulation from the Democrats and from President Biden. And people have been worried that, the promises that were made during the campaign weren't going to be lived up to, right? You had the very first meeting with legislatures that the president had. Who did it go to? It went to Republicans. And what did they want to discuss? They wanted to discuss not his $1.9 trillion relief plan, but they wanted to talk about a widdly piddly $600. Oh, it was just about $600, right? $600 billion plan. And people were worried about that. And then on top of that, there was something that I mentioned, gosh, what was it, maybe 2 weeks ago, very early on, even though we're still early on in the Biden administration. But I mentioned how you have some people within who have the president's ear, people who are part of his economic team, who are trying to discourage him from providing not just the massive amounts of relief that he wants to provide, but you even have some people who, like, quite frankly, don't want him to provide any relief at all. These are people who are right there with him in the Oval Office, and they have his ear, right? Again, I've talked about that weeks ago. And you have people now in the mainstream media and, other sources on YouTube, other podcasters who are just now talking about it. But this is not something that is new. If you've been kind of paying attention to his inner circle, they have been making public statements, some of them, about their lack of support for massive stimulus and in some cases more stimulus at all. And so when you consider those things, to now hear from Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, that, hey, we are not going to dither, we're not going to delay, and we are not going to dilute three things that many people, when we look at last year, many Americans feel like those three things were exactly what were done regarding our economic stimulus and relief due to COVID-19. And so it's pretty refreshing. And this isn't just something that he got up and he said. He's actually pairing that with a willingness and the votes to go ahead and use reconciliation, right? Now, you do have there have been conversations around, and I'm going to I wasn't really planning to mention this, but I feel like I want to mention it anyways. There has been a lot of conversation around Joe Manchin, right? We talk about rhinos, Republicans in name only. Quite frankly, he is a Democrat in name only. When you look at his voting record, when you look at what he supports, when you look at his ideology, it is very clear that he's not really a Democrat, right? And even when you consider that he advocates, just even on economic stimulus, that he advocates for just even hearing out the Republicans more than he did. When do you ever hear him talk about or, mention that he wants us to equally hear out progressives? You don't ever hear that, but he has no problem being vocal about his desire to hear, what Republicans have to say, and the fact that we need to capitulate to them, and the fact that. But anywho, there's been a lot of concerns around Joe Manchin and his willingness to kind of go along to get along, again, because everyone knows it's not a secret that he's a Democrat in name only. So there was a lot of concern about if he would kind of come along, and if he would be the person to kind of hang up stimulus relief. But he has stated publicly that he will go along with stimulus using reconciliation. Quite frankly, I do believe that was his hand was kind of forced on that by the visit that the vice president took down to his state. He he wasn't too happy about it, and he was very vocal about it. But they did a marketing push. She did a marketing push down there that, again, really sheds light on not just the issue, but the impact to his constituents, and really puts him on the hook for voting in their favor. Again, something that he quite frankly opposes, because he claims to serve Democrats, but he's not really a Democratic person, right? He's more a Republican. But anywho, there have been concerns about him. He said he's going to go along with the stimulus. Using reconciliation, he'll go along with it. However, there is a sticking point that I'm not quite sure what this means. He did say that he is opposed to raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, which is something, wrongly or rightly, however you feel about it, it's something that the Democrats want to stick in this $1.9 trillion relief plan. So that begs the question, is he setting himself up to say that, yeah, I would have supported this legislation, but I can't because I can't support $15 an hour? Is he kind of setting himself up to go ahead and be that person who's going to deny it? Or is he saying, well, I'll do it anyways, I'll support it, but just know that I'm opposed to it, um, in my heart, but I'll still vote. Nobody, I don't know what this man is going to do, but I do think that he's kind of set the stage to kind of go either way. That said, I wouldn't be surprised if he is actively out there telling his constituents that he will support it, and he wants stimulus, but he can't, because it just would be too detrimental to his constituents to raise their minimum wage to $15 an hour. But kind of the last thing that I'll say in this moment about reconciliation is, well, it's actually an observation. I want you to kind of think about it, see if you've seen this, and then kind of, if you haven't, pay attention to it. If you noticed, the end, well, right before the election, what was the one word that was used so much with Republicans? That one word was targeted. We need targeted relief, because targeted relief will help targeted Americans with the targeted COVID economic, right? The word that they used was targeted. And I talked about the use of this word. I talked about how linguistics is important, because perception is reality, not just in life, but perception is the name of the game in politics. And part of perception is not just what you see, but what you hear, right? Politicians don't just happen to use certain words. They don't just happen to use the word that comes to the tip of their, that's on the tip of their tongue by chance, or the word, or the words that they use on an everyday basis. They carefully craft the words that they want to use. And so the narrative around this word target is not that they want the help to be specific in a way that is well, put it like this: they want it to be specific because they want it to be smaller. Target means smaller, target means limited. But when you use the word targeted, it doesn't sound as bad as saying, I want the stimulus to be limited, I want the stimulus to be smaller, I want the stimulus to help less people. I want the stimulus to not provide as much assistance. All of that means the same thing as I want it to be targeted, but targeted to the untrained ear, to the unlistening ear, does not sound so bad. So, anywho, right before, and actually, really, from about the summer up until the election, we really heard the word targeted. Targeted was the word that was used. Why? Not just because they wanted to provide less relief, but it was their opposition to us getting not just sufficient relief, but really any relief, right? They opposed what happened or what was passed in the House because they wanted something more targeted. What did they really want? They wanted something smaller. They wanted something that helped less people. But now I want you to consider what we're seeing in this moment. From about the election to the time that the most recent stimulus package was passed, the word targeted magically went away. Why did it go away? Well, it went away because of Georgia. It went away because they needed the hopium that they were trying to get you to smoke. They needed you to have hopium that if you elected their officials, their candidates, if you let them keep Loeffler and Perdue in office, they would really help you. That's what they wanted to sell you on. And they couldn't use the word targeted. So again, targeted magically disappeared. It totally disappeared from the election to the time we got this most recent stimulus package. But now, notice, targeted has made a resurgence. It's back. It's back and it's in full force. And I think it's an interesting thing, because we're moving ahead with reconciliation. And when you consider all the power that the word targeted, like words have power, like mass amounts of power. For one, I mentioned how there's power in perception and the use of the word targeted as opposed to the word small, minute, barely there. There's power in using the word targeted. But there's also power in what they were able to do with the use of that word based on the perception of the people. And now they're bringing it back to do the same thing. But considering that Democrats have committed to using reconciliation to get us that next form of stimulus, that according to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, they are not going to delay, they are not going to dilute, and they are not going to dither. Being that they are going to use reconciliation to get us that next form of stimulus, they ultimately have taken away some of the power of the word targeted. Not all of it, because they're still, they can't take away the perception that people will have by the use of the word targeted. But by using reconciliation, they are now able to forego the damage that targeted does by not allowing people to move forward, by not allowing stimulus to be had. And that's a beautiful thing. It's a very beautiful thing. So when you hear these discussions about, Democrats, they need to be bipartisan, and they need to bring Republicans to the table. Yeah, I'll have you at the table if you want to negotiate in good faith. But I've mentioned so many times, look at what happened with Obamacare, right? Look at what happened over and over and over and over when Democrats have said, you know what, let's be friends with I'm not saying don't be friends. What happened to the days when politicians could disagree on issues, they could fight for their points and for their political beliefs, not physically, because some Republicans nowadays believe when you use that word, they mean go and do an insurrection at the Capitol. That's not what I'm talking about. But what happened to the days where you could really disagree? You could be at political odds, but then you could go to lunch after the fact, right? These people can't do that. Like, they're bringing guns into the, like, these people are legit nuts. Not all of them, but many of them, right? But this whole bipartisan thing, first and foremost, that is disingenuous on its surface, because how many times did Mitch McConnell to please his Lord and Savior Donald Trump, how many times did he in fact use reconciliation, especially for what? Tax cuts. So don't give me that crap about, we can't use reconciliation. You used it all the time. What's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? Democrats cannot be these bleeding heart, yes, be compassionate. Yes, hear what people have to say. But Democrats need to keep in mind, and I'm so glad that I've heard Senator Sanders talk about this. He said, I'm willing, if you want to come to the table and give me differing ideas, and talk about it, I'll do that. But we have an end goal here. And if you are not meeting the goal and you want to focus on bipartisanship rather than focusing on addressing the issue, which is the detrimental circumstances that our economy finds itself in because of COVID, if you don't want to sufficiently and adequately, effectively and efficiently address that, I don't give two cahoots about your bipartisanship, because I didn't come to Congress to make friends. I came to Congress to solve issues. And that is what we need representatives and senators to know. You came to solve issues. You did not come to make friends. Make friends before you get to Congress. But when you get there, your job is to solve issues, period.